So on this slide, you can see, okay? Oh, you probably can't see that so well. Okay. So I'll do this just for your benefit, and then I'll have to move it back because you chose this cheap seats. Okay? Go ahead. Taking note. Okay, so who in this picture is meditating? Left or the right? So some people said left, some people said right. I heard a lot of both. Yeah? Left, right, both? Okay, put your hand up if you think it's left. Oh, they've chickened out. Right? And both? What about neither? Neither? What about I don't know? We're so scared to say it. It doesn't even occur to us that maybe I don't know. How do you know if the guy on the right is not sleeping? You have no idea. You have absolutely no idea the guy on the right is not sleeping. Do you? You don't know. That's not the point of the slide. The point of this, the point of the slide is to say that meditation does have different forms, right? It's this whole spectrum, right, from mindfulness all the way through to different forms of active meditation. And it can go from meditating and focusing the mind on something specific, or trying to empty the mind, and that kind of end of meditation. And so I'm not going to get into the kind of specifics of meditation because that would be too long. But the point I did want to make was that, in a sense, it's not really a technique. Most of the time when we talk about meditation, particularly when we're trying to think about it in terms of a school context, and there's this idea of meditation and a curriculum and all the rest of it, we think about it as a technique. And it's not a technique. It's absolutely a state. Like the idea being that a state of our consciousness defines whether we're in a meditative state or not the technique that you're doing. Does that make sense? And I think that shift is a really important shift in terms of how we think about the purpose and the forms of meditation. Many of you may have seen this video before. It's a 1-minute video. Some of you may have seen it. Regardless of whether or not you've seen it or not, just pay attention anyway. And if you've seen it, no comments until I invite them. All right. Ready? Okay, the task is going to be, you're going to have to count how many times the players wearing white...
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
You have to count.
The correct answer is 16 passes.
Okay, wait.
Did you spot the gorilla?
Okay, first of all, how many of you have seen this before? Okay, quite a few. Now, for those, so put your hands out. Of those who have not seen this before, how many of you spotted the gorilla? And how many of you did not? Okay, so it's exactly what the study says, half. Okay, but there's a slightly additional trick to this.
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla.
Yeah, gorilla's coming, don't worry.
If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game?
Okay, for those of you who have seen it before, how many of you saw the curtain change and the person leave the video? Hardly any of you, right? So maybe 2, 3. Okay. So here we go.
Count how many times
Sorry, I knew I was going to...
The correct answer is... people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
Okay. So for those of you who have seen this video before and did not spot, that's why I told you to pay attention. You thought I was just being silly. You didn't spot the guy. What was it, in black, right? Yeah, the player in black leaving the screen or the changing color, right? Hardly anyone spotted that. And only half see a gorilla. I mean, I bet actually there were a couple of people who laughed. There were a couple of people who laughed during that, right? Like when the gorilla came on. So I bet of the half people who actually noticed the gorilla probably got triggered by the laugh. So what this is telling us, I mean, it's obvious what it's telling us, but how it relates to what we're talking about, is like right in our face, and we don't notice it. And our consciousness is, like when we're talking about like what are we paying attention to? You're used to saying, children, pay attention. So, well, why aren't you paying attention, right? So the idea is that we're not always so good at seeing everything that's before us. And by seeing, I mean experiencing everything that's before us, even when it's really in our face. And this notion of what is it that we pay attention to determines our experience, right? So we're all looking at the screen. We're all seeing the gorilla come on the screen. It's not that you didn't see it. You saw it, but your mind didn't register it for half. So the experience, so the actual act of seeing has been the same for everyone. But the experience was totally different for half. There's an issue there, right? My experience in life is totally different depending on what am I paying attention to. It's not what am I seeing or hearing or smelling or touching. It's not that, because that could be universal for everyone. But my experience could be totally different in life dependent on what am I paying attention to. Does that make sense? And I think this is, again, like this idea of raising consciousness, this notion that we all experience different states of consciousness through our day, right? We know when we're in a good mood, a bad mood at a very basic level, and then all the other ways that you could think about consciousness. We all experience those different fluctuations. We all want to be, at least theoretically, we all want to be in our best place all the time. But what is it that takes us there? Now, if we don't think about it, so sometimes what happens is that we just let it happen by accident. Now I'm in a good mood, next I'm in a bad mood, and it's just an accident, and it's just like, whatever, it's just life. But there are ways in which we can raise consciousness. That's what meditation is about. Like, there are ways in which we can help raise our consciousness deliberately and keep it there. It may not be, it takes obviously a lot of practice to do it on a keep it there forever kind of level, but at least we can raise it there and keep it there for longer than it would be had we not started our spiritual journey. Okay? And I wanted to just give you a sense of that, just like this idea of like what it is. So there's a really beautiful passage, it's a chapter actually, in a spiritual text which talks about a king, and he comes across a mendicant. And when he comes across this mendicant, he says to this person, he can see from just how this person looks, that this person is extremely spiritually advanced. Like they're just like totally, fully conscious. And he says, I'm really surprised because, you don't look like a religious person. You have no religious trappings. You have no signs of religiosity. You have no, I don't see any religious practice. Like, what is it? But yet, you seem to be so spiritually awake. What is it? Like, how did you do that? And this mendicant kind of explains. So he says that through my travels around the world, I saw and experienced many different things. And from those things, I learned different lessons. And by meditating and reflecting on those lessons, I became spiritually awake. And then he lists the 24, he calls them gurus. He says, these are my 24 gurus. And from these teachers, I learned the following lessons. And I'll just read you a couple. So he says, my first guru was the earth. And as I traveled around the world, I learned from the earth tolerance. He learned that even when harassed by others, one should know that they are acting helplessly under their own habits and limitations. And so one should not become distracted from one's own path. Just like the earth tolerates and is harassed and yet still maintains us all. He says, my next teacher was the trees. So from the trees I learned that they devote all their efforts, their very existence, to the service of others. And from them, he learned to be selfless. And he goes on and he goes through these 24 lessons. Now, what was the point of this? Is this notion that we can go through the world, just like the black gorilla, we can see many things, but we can learn nothing from it. We can gain no experience from that whatsoever. And yet we can do the same thing, we can do the same exact routine, and you know, have the same perceptions, and yet have an absolutely different experience, because our consciousness is tuned in to learning something from that situation. It's tuned in to experiencing something spiritual from that situation. So when we have the student residentials here, and sometimes they go on a nature walk. It's part of their, not every time, but sometimes it is. And I noticed something really, really interesting, and it's so, I'm absolutely sure it'll be the same for all of you. So if you send them on a nature walk, they'll go for a nature walk for like, whatever, half an hour, let's say. They come back, and then you say to them, what did you learn? And they'll give you some really, not all of them, but you'll get some really low-level responses. Like really low-level responses. And you're thinking, no, you're way more capable than that. And yet, so I tried this with, I think it was an upper key stage 2 class. So I said to them, okay, so before they went out, I spent literally a minute and a half. So I said to them, you're going to go on this nature walk now. And on this nature walk, I want you to be alert to what you see and experience around you. And when you come back, we're all going to come together, and I want you to share something that was really powerful, that you were really either awed by or inspired by, that you felt really awoke something in you. A really powerful lesson from nature. And when they came, so I spoke to them for less than 2 minutes. When they came back from the same walk, they had the most mind-blowing responses. Like genuinely mind-blowing. I was absolutely shocked. And I thought, like, it's such a, to your point, right? How do we insert these prompts, if you like, to help them on their spiritual journey? Us too. Like, how do we insert these prompts for them to be awake to that? And I think a lot of it is actually just being conscious that this is important. This is something that we need to keep drip feeding into the process, into the system. Because without that active intervention from all of us, it just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist naturally within the system because we've removed it. Over decades, we've systematically removed it from the system. So to bring it back, we need to start drip feeding it into our day-to-day, moment-to-moment interactions with students in the classroom. But in order to do that, guess what? Exactly, right? We, all of us, that needs to be at the forefront of our minds also. It's not just something that happens in assembly in the beginning of the day. It's not just something that happens on a retreat, at the Vedanta once a year. It's not, because that can very easily become our default position. That's what the whatever PRE department do. That's what they do in meditation, in yoga. That's what they do in assembly or whatever. But that's not what is going to bring about a spiritual transformation. It's not what's going to make them like really inspired and spiritually awake. It's when it happens in the moment to moment. And for them and for us to learn, just like we learned from these stories, how we can learn really everything from our moment to moment interactions. If we drill down deep enough, it can completely change our experience of life. Okay, so I'm going to pause here because there is a task. There's this one task that I'd like you just to jot down. You don't have to complete it now, but maybe a reflection for you over the course of the next day and a half is just ask yourself that when we think about good, better, higher, whatever term works for you, consciousness, what does that look like? What does it look like for me? What does it feel like? How am I feeling about it? What's my emotional state? What's my physical state? Like, what does it feel like, right? Try and make it tangible for yourself. Because what the purpose of this exercise is really to try and crystallize for ourselves, what is our aspiration here in terms of our state, of consciousness, so that we know where we're heading to. And the second piece of this, and this was the task I gave to the last group, and I'll give it to you guys and see if you could do any better than 80 or 90% of people who didn't do it, is to say, what are the things that I feel raise my state of consciousness? Now, it's interesting here because we all have our own life experience, okay? So we know to some extent what works for us. We know what raises and helps raise our level of consciousness. But there will be things that we haven't experienced that if we did experience, they may well do the same or even better. So there's one thing about actually identifying what have I experienced, and that will also open our eyes to what more could I experience that could help raise my level of consciousness. But the second part of this is, if I know that these are the things that raise my level of consciousness, and if these are things that I enjoy, and that's the sweet spot, I enjoy it and it raises my level of consciousness. Sometimes I enjoy it, but it drops my level of consciousness, and therefore my habits drive me in that direction, okay? Because I enjoy it, and so I'm chasing that enjoyment. But this is the sweet spot we're trying to find here is, I really enjoy it, and it raises my level of consciousness. And then I'm going to ask you to do what? 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes a day. Do something you enjoy. Please. So 5 minutes a day, do something that you enjoy and raises your level of consciousness. Is that such a hard thing to ask? It is. Because 90% of you are not going to do it. I really, really hope that you prove me wrong. But what we're going to do now, so you've got the homework? Okay, so at the end of this day and a half, we'll check in with you to see how you've done on your homework. So for now, we're going to give you a 15-minute break, but before that, Sahil's got an announcement about snoring.